The summons. The courtroom stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floor, its ceiling lost in artificial stars that mimicked the galactic core. Commander Caden Vross stood in the defendant's circle, a lone human surrounded by 1,000 alien dignitaries who had gathered to witness what the Galactic Tribunal called the reckoning of a barbaric species. His boots echoed against the crystalline platform as guards escorted him forward. The chains binding his wrists hummed with quantum locks designed to restrain beings far stronger than any human. Yet Caden walked with his shoulders back and his chin high, gray eyes scanning the assembly with the calm assessment of a predator sizing up prey. Human Caden Vross, intoned Supreme Arbiter Thelnox, her 6 tentacles writhing with barely contained disgust. Her species, the Zenthri, had petitioned for humanity's trial more vigorously than any other. You stand accused of leading your species in acts of unprecedented violence against the civilized galaxy. How do you plead? Caden's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Not guilty. A ripple of disbelief swept through the chamber. Holographic displays flickered to life around the vast space, showing scenes of human warships engaging Zenthri fleets, human soldiers fighting in close combat against superior numbers, human colonies refusing to surrender even when orbital bombardment seemed inevitable. The evidence is irrefutable, Thelnox continued, her voice dripping with venom. Your species has rejected every peaceful overture. You wage war with a ferocity that violates 17 galactic accords on civilized warfare. You refuse to acknowledge the natural order where stronger, older civilizations guide the younger ones. Guide. Caden's voice carried across the chamber without amplification, strong and clear. Is that what you call it when the Zenthri Empire demanded Earth surrender its autonomy? When you ordered us to dismantle our military and accept your protectorate status? Thelnox's tentacles tightened. The alternative was the chaos you have unleashed. 3 years of bloodshed. Countless lives lost across both our civilizations. Then perhaps you should have accepted our first answer, Caden replied. We said no. We didn't fire the first shot. You did when your fleet entered Sol System uninvited. Murmurs spread through the assembly. Not all species present agreed with the Zenthri's aggressive expansion policies, but none had dared oppose them openly. The Zenthri controlled the Galactic Council through a combination of economic leverage and military might that had gone unchallenged for 3,000 years. You speak of sovereignty, Thelnox said, her tone shifting to condescension. Yet your species has existed in space for barely a century. What right do primitives have to reject the wisdom of empires that mastered the stars when your ancestors were still dwelling in caves? The same right every sentient species has, Caden answered. The right to choose our own path. The right to stand or fall by our own decisions. You mistake age for wisdom, Arbiter. Sometimes the old only master the art of justifying their tyranny. A Zenthri counselor rose from his seat, his bioluminescent skin flashing with anger. You speak of tyranny when your forces destroyed the orbital stations above Kepler 442b. 60,000 civilians died in that attack. Caden's expression hardened. After your fleet bombarded the human colony on that world for 6 days. After you killed 300,000 men, women, and children who had lived there for 2 generations. You left us no military targets, counselor. You made sure of that. So we adapted. You committed a war crime, the counselor spat. We committed survival, Caden shot back. And before you climb too high on that moral pedestal, remember that every Zenthri civilian on those stations was involved in military logistics, processing targeting data for the bombardment fleets. Your entire civilization is mobilized for conquest. Ours mobilized for survival. Supreme Arbiter Thelnox slammed her gavel equivalent, a pulse of sonic energy that silenced the growing arguments erupting across the chamber. Enough. This tribunal was not convened to debate military ethics. We are here to determine whether humanity poses an existential threat to galactic civilization. She gestured and new holographic images appeared. These showed human behavior through a different lens. Archaeological sites where humanity had discovered evidence of ancient conflicts and learned from them, historical records of human wars and the treaties that ended them, psychological profiles suggesting humans possessed an unusual capacity for both extreme violence and profound mercy. Humanity is young, aggressive, and dangerously unpredictable, Thelnox declared. Left unchecked, your species will bring nothing but chaos to the established order. The Council has convened to determine if your civilization should be allowed to continue existing. A chill ran through Caden despite his composure. They weren't here to judge his actions. They were here to judge his entire species. You're talking about genocide, he said quietly. We're talking about quarantine, Thelnox corrected. A permanent embargo. Humanity confined to your home system, your technology suppressed, your expansion halted. If you resist, more extreme measures may be necessary. Caden looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species represented. Some watched with obvious sympathy but said nothing. Others gazed at him with the cold calculation of beings deciding whether an animal should be put down. And if we refuse, he asked. Then we will have our answer about whether your species can be reasoned with, Thelnox replied. The Zenthari fleet stands ready. 2,000 warships in Sol system, Commander. Your homeworld is surrounded. Whether Earth burns or merely sleeps is the decision this tribunal will make. Caden stood silent for a long moment, processing the threat. 2,000 ships. Earth's entire fleet numbered 300 after 3 years of desperate warfare. The math was brutally simple. But as he looked at Thelnox's confident expression, at the smug certainty radiating from the Zenthari delegation, something his old instructor had once told him surfaced in his memory: the biggest mistake an enemy can make is believing they've already won. I request the right to present a defense, Caden said. That is why you stand here, Thelnox replied. No, Caden corrected. I request the right to present humanity's defense. Not mine. You want to judge my entire species based on 3 years of war? Then let me show you 300,000 years of human history. Let me show you why we are the way we are. Let me show you why we will never surrender no matter the odds. Thelnox's tentacles curled in what might have been amusement. Very well, Commander. You have 3 days to present your case. But I warn you, nothing you say will change the fundamental reality. Humanity must be contained or eliminated. The galaxy will not tolerate another species that refuses to accept its place in the natural order. Caden met her gaze steadily. Then I guess we'll find out if your natural order is as inevitable as you think. As the guards escorted him back to his cell, Caden felt the weight of his species' future pressing down on him. They had given him 3 days to save humanity. He would need every second. The defense begins. The tribunal reconvened in the morning cycle, though morning and night held little meaning in the artificial environment of the Galactic Council station. Caden stood once more in the defendant's circle, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, a team of human technicians had set up holographic projection equipment, granted by the tribunal's rules of evidence. The defense may begin, Supreme Arbiter Thelnox announced, her tentacles coiled in barely patient loops. Caden touched a control pad and the chamber's lighting dimmed. Above the assembly, a massive holographic display flickered to life, showing Earth from orbit. Not the besieged Earth of the present, but Earth as it had been millennia ago, lush and blue, untouched by spacefaring civilization. You call us barbaric, Caden began, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. You call us violent, unpredictable, dangerous. You're not wrong. But to understand why humanity fights the way we do, you need to understand where we come from. The image zoomed down to Africa, to vast savannas where early humans walked upright across dangerous plains. We evolved as persistence hunters on a world that was actively trying to kill us. We weren't the strongest predators. We weren't the fastest. We didn't have claws or fangs or natural armor. The hologram showed early humans tracking prey across endless grasslands. What we had was stubbornness. We learned to follow wounded prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We learned that if we couldn't outrun the lion, we could outlast it. We learned that giving up meant death, so we never gave up. A Zenthari counselor scoffed. This is meant to justify your aggression? That you evolved as persistence predators? No, Caden replied. It's meant to explain why you fundamentally misunderstand us. You evolved on worlds where strength equaled survival, where the strong ruled and the weak served. You look at the galaxy and see a natural hierarchy because that's what your evolution taught you. The hologram shifted, showing human civilizations rising and falling. Egypt, Rome, China, the Americas, cycles of empire and collapse. We learned something different. We learned that the strong don't always win. We learned that the underdog can triumph through cunning, endurance, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. And this is supposed to impress us? Thelnox asked. That your history is an endless cycle of violence? Look closer, Caden commanded, zooming the display to specific moments. After every war we built something. After the devastation of our world wars, we created international law, human rights declarations, global organizations dedicated to peace. We failed constantly, but we kept trying. The images showed the United Nations, the Geneva Conventions, peacekeeping missions, medical aid crossing borders even between enemies. You see our capacity for violence. But you ignore our equal capacity for compassion. Both are part of who we are. A counselor from the Vrin Collective, a species known for their philosophical nature, spoke up. You speak of duality, but your compassion appears reserved for your own kind. You show little mercy to your enemies. Caden nodded. You're not entirely wrong. But let me show you something. The display changed to show a battlefield from Earth's Second World War. Enemy soldiers, injured and captured, being treated by medics who hours before had been trying to kill them. We have this concept called honor among enemies. Even in our most brutal conflicts we developed rules. We treated prisoners humanely, or at least we were supposed to. When we failed to do so, we called it a war crime and prosecuted our own soldiers. Ancient history, Thelnox dismissed. What relevance does this have to your current aggression? Everything, Caden replied. Because it shows you that we're capable of restraint. We could have used nuclear weapons against the Zenthri colonies. We have antimatter weapons we've never deployed. We could have targeted civilian populations systematically the way you did to us. But we didn't. The hologram now showed recent battles, and the truth of Caden's words became evident. Human forces engaged military targets almost exclusively. When civilian casualties occurred, they were incidental to military objectives, not the objective itself. You destroyed our orbital stations, a Zenthri counselor protested. Military logistics hubs processing targeting data for genocide, Caden countered. Every person on those stations was actively participating in the extermination of human colonies. By your own laws they were legitimate targets. We gave them 6 hours to evacuate. Most chose to stay. That was their decision. He paused, letting that sink in. Now compare that to Kepler 442b. Your forces bombarded civilian centers for 6 days. Hospitals, schools, residential districts. You were sending a message, not fighting a war. And when we responded, you called us barbaric. The mood in the chamber shifted slightly. Several counselors who had been nodding along with Thelnox now looked uncomfortable. Caden pressed his advantage. You want to know why humanity fights with such ferocity? Because you attacked us in our homes. You came to our worlds, to our families, and you tried to make us kneel. And we've learned across thousands of years of history that when you kneel to a tyrant, you never get back up. Tyrant? Thelnox's voice rose dangerously. The Zenthri Empire has brought order to this galaxy for 3 millennia. The order of the strong over the weak, Caden replied. The order where might makes right and the old civilizations enforce their will on the young ones. You call it wisdom. We call it empire. And humanity has a long history of fighting empires. The hologram shifted again, showing humanity's expansion into space. The first colonies, the struggles against hostile environments, the slow building of infrastructure across multiple systems. We spent a century learning to survive in space. We made mistakes. We lost people. But we persevered because that's what humans do. And then you arrived, Caden said, pointing at the Zenthri delegation. You saw a young species with valuable territory and advanced technology we developed independently. You saw opportunity. You demanded we submit to your protection. And when we refused, you called us barbaric for wanting to control our own destiny. A counselor from the Mothkar hegemony, a species that had submitted to Zenthri dominance generations ago, spoke hesitantly. The alternative to order is chaos. Without the strong guiding the weak, the galaxy would descend into endless warfare. Is that what you tell yourself? Caden asked, his tone softening. That it's better to accept subjugation than to fight for freedom? Maybe for your species that calculation made sense. But humanity has paid the price of freedom too many times to surrender it now. He walked closer to the edge of the defendant's circle, looking up at the assembled aliens. You want to judge whether humanity deserves to survive. Fine. But understand what you're really judging. You're not judging whether we're violent or peaceful, civilized or barbaric. You're judging whether the galaxy has room for a species that refuses to accept that the old must always rule the young. The natural order exists for a reason, Thelnox insisted. Nature is red in tooth and claw, Caden quoted. One of our poets wrote that. And it's true. Nature is violent, competitive, brutal. But humans learn to build civilization despite nature, not because of it. We learn to cooperation, to suppress our violent instincts in service of the greater good. We're not perfect at it. But we try. The hologram showed images of human cooperation, rescue workers pulling strangers from rubble, doctors volunteering in disaster zones, communities rebuilding after devastation. This is also humanity. The part you choose not to see because it doesn't fit your narrative that we're mindless savages. We see what you show us, a counselor observed. How do we know these images are representative? Because I'm not hiding our failures, Caden replied. Yes, we're capable of terrible violence. Yes, we've committed atrocities throughout our history. But we've also built systems to prevent them, laws to punish them, and moral frameworks to condemn them. We're a species in progress, always have been. And you're proposing to end that progress because we refuse to let you dictate its direction. He turned back to Thelnox. You have 2,000 ships surrounding Earth. You could destroy us tomorrow. But before you do, I'm asking you to consider what you'll be destroying. Not just a species, but the idea that a young civilization has the right to chart its own course. That freedom is worth fighting for. That the underdog can sometimes win. Inspiring rhetoric, Thelnox said coldly. But words do not change reality. Your species is outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. Defiance without the means to back it up is not courage. It's suicide. Caden smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. That's where you're wrong, Arbiter. We've been outnumbered and outgunned our entire history. And yet, somehow we're still here. Still fighting. Still refusing to quit. Tomorrow I'll show you why. As the tribunal adjourned for the day, Caden walked back to his cell with his head high. The first day had been about establishing context, about humanizing his species to aliens who saw humans as little more than violent animals. Tomorrow he would show them what those violent animals could do when their backs were against the wall. The warrior's truth. Day 2 of the tribunal began with an unexpected development. As Caden was escorted to the defendant's circle, he noticed the attendance had swelled. Word of his defense had spread through the station, and now representatives from dozens of minor species filled the observation galleries, species too small to have votes in the council but curious about the human who dared to challenge the Zenthari Empire. Supreme Arbiter Thelnox noticed as well, her tentacles coiling with displeasure. It seems you have attracted an audience, Commander Vross. Let us hope your second day of testimony justifies their interest. Let's hope so, Caden agreed. He activated the holographic display, and the chamber filled with images of human military history. Not glorified, not sanitized, but raw and honest. Spartans at Thermopylae. Romans' legions. Medieval knights. Modern soldiers in trenches, in jungles, in deserts. Yesterday I talked about human potential for peace, Caden said. Today I'm going to talk about our capacity for war. Because that's what really scares you, isn't it? Not that we're violent, but that we're good at it. A ripple of discomfort moved through the Zenthari delegation. Humans have been at war with each other for our entire existence, Caden continued. We've developed strategies, tactics, and technologies dedicated solely to killing other humans more efficiently. We've studied the art of warfare the way your species study art and philosophy. And we've gotten very, very good at it. The display showed historical battles, brilliant military strategies, innovations in warfare that had changed the course of human history. The problem you've encountered isn't that we're mindless savages. It's that we're thinking savages. We adapt. We innovate. We learn from every defeat and come back stronger. A Zenthari military counselor stood, his bioluminescence pulsing red with anger. You speak as if your primitive tactics are something to be proud of. Our military doctrines have been refined over 3,000 years. Your entire spacefaring military history spans less than a century. Exactly, Caden replied, and his smile was sharp as a blade. Your doctrines are 3,000 years old. They haven't changed because they haven't needed to. You've been fighting species that think like you, that follow the same rules, that accept the same limitations. Then you encountered us. He pulled up tactical displays from recent battles. Battle of Proxima Station. Your fleet of 200 ships engaged our defensive force of 30. By all your projections you should have overwhelmed us in hours. Instead, the battle lasted 3 weeks and you lost 40 ships before we finally withdrew. You lost the station, the counselor pointed out. We evacuated 90% of the population first, Caden countered. We turned the station itself into a weapon, luring your ships into tight formations, then detonating the fusion reactors. Was it honorable by your standards? No. Was it effective? 40 of your ships turned to debris would suggest yes. The display shifted to another battle. The Kepler defense. You surrounded the colony with orbital superiority, ground forces ready for occupation. Standard Zenthari doctrine. Demonstrate overwhelming force, demand surrender, occupy if necessary. But humans don't surrender. Images showed human colonists, not soldiers but farmers and engineers and teachers taking up weapons. Improvised explosives turning city streets into death traps. Supply lines harassed constantly. Occupation forces finding no safe harbor, no moment of peace. You occupied that world for 6 months, Caden said. You never controlled it. Every day cost you resources, ships, soldiers. And when you finally decided to just bombard it from orbit, you proved my point about your civilized warfare. You'd rather commit genocide than admit you couldn't break our spirit. We offered terms, a counselor protested. Surrender and the civilians would be spared. Surrender and they'd be slaves, Caden shot back. Living under Zenthari rule, their children raised to serve your empire, their culture erased over generations. You call that mercy? We call that a fate worse than death. He let that hang in the air before continuing. But here's what really terrifies you about human warfare. It's not our tactics or our weapons or our refusal to surrender. It's that we fight without regard for the odds. You calculate cost-benefit ratios. You retreat when losses exceed acceptable parameters. You think rationally. And you don't. Thelnox asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Not when it matters, Caden admitted. When a human decides something is worth dying for, the math stops mattering. We'll charge into certain death if we think it might give our comrades a chance. We'll hold impossible positions just to buy time. We'll sacrifice ourselves for abstract concepts like honor or duty or freedom. The display showed soldiers in every era doing exactly that. Last stands that should have been defeats turned into legends. Alamo, Stalingrad, the Battle of Britain, countless examples of humans fighting far beyond any rational calculation. You think that makes you noble? A counselor asked. I think it makes us unpredictable, Caden replied. And that's death to your kind of warfare. You can't negotiate with someone willing to die for their beliefs. You can't intimidate someone who's made peace with their mortality. And you can't conquer someone who'll make you pay in blood for every meter of ground. He walked to the edge of the circle, addressing the assembled aliens directly. 3 years ago you arrived at Earth with overwhelming force. You expected us to calculate the odds and surrender. Instead, we looked at those odds and said, challenge accepted. You've been fighting us ever since, and every battle cost you more than you expected. Pyrrhic victories, Thelnox said. You win battles and lose wars. Your fleet is decimated. Your colonies are destroyed or blockaded. Earth itself is surrounded. You speak of defiance, but defiance without victory is merely slow defeat. Is it? Caden asked. Let me tell you about the concept of strategic victory. Sometimes you don't need to win. You just need to make winning too expensive for the enemy to stomach. He pulled up casualty figures, resource expenditure, fleet readiness reports from Zenthari forces. 3 years of war against a species that by your own assessment is primitive and young. 3 years of constant combat, guerrilla warfare, ambushes, desperate last stands. And look at what it's cost you. The numbers told a damning story. The Zenthari had lost more ships in 3 years fighting humanity than in the previous 3 centuries of maintaining their empire. Resource expenditure had tripled. Military readiness across their empire was down as forces were redirected to contain humanity. You're bleeding, Caden said bluntly. Oh, you're stronger than us, no question. But you're bleeding and your empire is watching. All those species you've subjugated over the centuries, they're watching humanity make you bleed, and they're wondering if maybe they could do the same. A murmur ran through the assembled aliens, quickly suppressed. But Caden had struck a nerve. That's why you're really here, he continued. Not because you want to judge humanity, but because you need to make an example of us. You need to show every species in the galaxy what happens when you defy the Zenthari Empire. You need to prove that resistance is futile. Because if humanity survives this trial, if we manage to negotiate some kind of peace or even just survive long enough to become a permanent thorn in your side, then the illusion of Zenthari invincibility shatters. An illusion is all Empire really is. The belief that resistance is impossible. The acceptance that this is just how things are. Thelnox's tentacles writhed with barely controlled rage. You overstep, human. We did not become the galaxy's dominant civilization through illusion but through strength, wisdom, and the will to maintain order. You became dominant because you were first, Caden replied. You expanded when the galaxy was young before other species developed spaceflight. You took the best worlds, the richest resources, the strategic positions. Then you wrote laws that preserved your advantages and called it civilization. But times change. New species emerge. And some of us aren't willing to accept that we missed some arbitrary window for self-determination. You want to maintain your order? Fine. But don't pretend it's about wisdom or civilization. It's about power. It's always been about power. He turned back to the display, showing images of humanity's achievements despite the war. Research continuing, art being created, children being born and taught even as battles raged across the colonies. This is what you're trying to crush. Not violence, not chaos, but hope. The hope that a young species can chart its own destiny. The hope that the future doesn't have to look like the past. And that's why we'll never surrender, Caden said quietly. You can destroy us. You probably will. But you can't make us quit. You can't make us accept your dominance. And every day we resist, every battle we fight, every small victory we achieve, we prove that your empire isn't inevitable. We prove that defiance is possible. We prove that even the mightiest empire can bleed. The tribunal chamber fell silent. Even Thelnox seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally she spoke. You have one more day of testimony, Commander Vross. I suggest you use it to explain why this tribunal should spare your species rather than eliminate a threat that by your own admission will never cease its resistance. Caden met her gaze steadily. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the galaxy you'll create if you destroy us. And I'll let you decide if that's the galaxy you want to live in. As he was escorted back to his cell, Caden allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had forced them to see humanity not as mindless barbarians but as dangerous ideological opponents. He'd made them afraid of what humanity represented. Now he just had to show them why that fear should lead to peace, not genocide. The price of dominance. The third and final day of testimony began with an unusual sight. The observation galleries were now packed with representatives from dozens of minor species, and even some major powers that had remained neutral in the conflict. The trial of humanity had become the most watched event in galactic politics in decades. Caden stood in the defendant's circle, noting the shift in atmosphere. Where before there had been certainty, now there was tension. He had spent 2 days humanizing his species and demonstrating their capabilities. Today he would plant the seeds of doubt that might save them. Commander Vross, Supreme Arbiter Thelnox began, you have had 2 days to present your defense. The tribunal has been patient with your attempts to justify humanity's aggression. But rhetoric and historical context do not change the fundamental question. Can the galaxy afford to allow humanity to survive? Can the galaxy afford not to? Caden countered immediately. He activated the holographic display, but instead of showing human history, it now showed the current galactic map. The Zenthari Empire stretched across vast swaths of space, with smaller powers clustered in less desirable regions. Dozens of species lived under Zenthari dominance, their territory marked in shades of red. This is your galaxy, Caden said. The Zenthari at the center, enforcing order, maintaining peace through overwhelming force. It's been stable for 3,000 years. But stability and justice are not the same thing. Here we go again, a Zenthari counselor muttered. More human moralizing. Not moralizing, Caden replied. Prediction. Because here's what happens if you destroy humanity today. The map shifted, showing Earth's system going dark, humanity erased from existence. You'll have eliminated a threat. Made an example. Shown the galaxy what happens to species that refuse to submit. But what happens next? He zoomed to a cluster of minor species near Zenthari space. These civilizations have been watching our war. They've seen humanity, a young and supposedly primitive species, make the mighty Zenthari bleed. They've seen your fleet struggle against guerrilla tactics and asymmetric warfare. They've watched us prove that resistance is possible. Now you eliminate us, and what message does that send? That resistance is indeed possible, but you'll be destroyed for trying? Or that the Zenthari will use overwhelming force to crush any dissent, even genocidal force? A counselor from the Vryn collective leaned forward. You suggest that destroying humanity would inspire rebellion? That seems counterintuitive. Is it? Caden asked. Throughout human history, martyrs have been more powerful than living rebels. Execute someone for their beliefs, and you validate those beliefs. You prove that the power you're defending is so fragile it can't tolerate even the possibility of challenge. The holographic display shifted to show historical examples from Earth. Executions that inspired revolutions. Massacres that galvanized resistance movements. Deaths that became symbols more powerful than the lives that preceded them. If you destroy humanity, we become a legend, Caden said. The species that said no to the Empire. The civilization that chose extinction over submission. And every minor species in the galaxy will remember that when your fleets arrive at their worlds with demands for compliance. Thelnox's tentacles coiled. You threaten us with your own martyrdom? I'm warning you about the consequences of your choices, Caden corrected. Because here's the thing about empires maintained by fear, they're inherently unstable. They require constant demonstrations of power to maintain the illusion of invincibility. But every demonstration also reveals the limits of that power. He pulled up the casualty figures again, the resource expenditure, the fleet movements. You've committed a significant portion of your military to contain one species for 3 years. Every other power in the galaxy has seen this. They're doing their own calculations. They're asking themselves, if the Zenthri need this much force to suppress humanity, what does that say about Zenthri's strength? We have more than enough strength to maintain order, a Zenthri military counselor declared. Do you? Caden challenged. Because I've been studying your empire while I've been your prisoner. Your expansion stopped centuries ago. Not because you ran out of ambition but because you reached the limits of sustainable control. Every new world you conquer requires resources to garrison, to administer, to suppress. And those resources come from somewhere. The map highlighted patterns of resource flow throughout the Zenthri Empire. You extract wealth from the periphery to maintain the core. Standard imperial economics. But there's a limit to extraction before rebellion becomes more appealing than submission. You've been managing that balance for centuries, keeping subject species just comfortable enough that revolt seems too risky. Now humanity comes along and breaks the equation. We've shown that revolt is possible. We've demonstrated tactics that even a technologically inferior species can use to make occupation untenable. We've proven that the Zenthri can be hurt. Caden walked closer to the edge of his circle, his voice dropping. And you're about to show every subject species in your empire that when you're truly threatened, you'll resort to genocide. Not occupation, not subjugation, but complete extermination. Tell me, Arbiter, how does that make your empire more stable? The question hung in the air. Several counselors from non-Zenthri species shifted uncomfortably. A representative from the Mothkar hegemony, a species that had submitted to Zenthri dominance generations ago, spoke hesitantly. The commander raises a valid concern. If the precedent is set that resistance leads to extermination rather than subjugation, does that not eliminate the incentive for peaceful submission? The Mothkar know their place, Thelnox said coldly. Do we? The Mothkar representative replied, surprising everyone. Or have we simply never seen an alternative worth the risk? The humans have shown us that alternative. Perhaps not a winning one, but an alternative nonetheless. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the minor species in the observation galleries. Caden seized the moment. This is what I'm talking about, he said. You're not just judging humanity. You're deciding what kind of galaxy you want. One where might makes right and young species have no choice but to submit? Or one where there's room for self-determination, even if it comes with conflict? We seek peace, Thelnox insisted. You seek control, Caden corrected. Peace is just your preferred method of maintaining it. But actual peace requires mutual respect, compromise, acknowledgement that different civilizations might have different values and goals. Your empire doesn't allow for that. It's submit or be conquered. And now we've proven there's a third option, resist and make it too expensive to conquer. He pulled up new data, projections of what continued war with humanity would cost the Zenthri. Even if you destroy Earth tomorrow, you'll still have to deal with human colonies scattered across 24 systems. Millions of humans who now have nothing to lose and every reason to fight. How many ships will it take to hunt them all down? How many years? How many resources? And while you're doing that, how many other species will see opportunity? How many will decide that maybe the Zenthri are too distracted to respond to rebellion? You'll be fighting brushfire wars across your empire for decades. Or, he continued, you could acknowledge that humanity has earned the right to exist. Not because we've won, but because we've proven we'll never stop fighting. You could negotiate a peace that gives us autonomy in exchange for ceasing hostilities. You could show the galaxy that the Zenthri are strong enough to make peace with a worthy opponent. Worthy opponent? Thelnox's voice dripped with scorn. You have 300 ships left. We have 2,000 surrounding your homeworld. You speak as if the two sides are equal. Numbers aren't everything, Caden replied. Otherwise, every war would be decided before the first shot. But you know what? Let me propose something radical. Let me show you what happens if you don't destroy us. The holographic display changed, now showing a potential future. Human ships flying alongside Zenthri vessels. Trade routes connecting human and alien worlds. Cultural exchanges, technological cooperation. A galaxy where humanity existed not as subjects but as independent partners. Imagine, Caden said, a galaxy where the Zenthri Empire doesn't need to spend resources suppressing humanity. Where our military capabilities are directed at common threats instead of at each other. where human innovation and Zenthri experience combined to solve problems neither could solve alone. Fantasy, Thelnox declared. Possibility, Caden countered. We're not asking to replace you. We're not demanding you dismantle your empire. We're asking for the right to exist independently, to make our own choices, to stand or fall by our own merits. Is that really so threatening? A long silence followed. The tribunal chamber, so certain at the beginning, now felt charged with uncertainty. Finally, a counselor from a neutral species spoke. What the human proposes is unprecedented. The Zenthri Empire has never acknowledged a species as equal rather than subject. Then maybe it's time for a precedent, Caden said. Because the alternative is what? Centuries of guerrilla warfare? The slow erosion of Zenthri power as you try to suppress a species that will never accept suppression? The risk that other species will follow our example? He met Thelnox's gaze directly. You have a choice, Arbiter. You can try to make us an example of the price of defiance. But I promise you, we'll make that price so high that the example you set won't be the one you intended. We'll show the galaxy that even in defeat humans don't break. Or you can be the civilization that was strong enough to make peace with an enemy that wouldn't surrender. You can show the galaxy that the Zenthri Empire is flexible enough to adapt to new realities. You can prove that your dominance comes from wisdom, not just force. The choice, Caden finished quietly, is yours. But choose carefully. Because the galaxy is watching, and the consequences of this decision will echo for centuries. Supreme Arbiter Thelnox sat in silence, her tentacles motionless. Around the chamber, counselors exchanged glances, calculations being made, alliances being tested. Finally Thelnox spoke. The tribunal will recess for deliberation. Commander Vross, you have presented your case. Tomorrow we will deliver our judgment. As Caden was escorted back to his cell, he felt the weight of uncertainty. He had given humanity's best defense, had planted every seed of doubt he could. But would it be enough? Tomorrow he would find out if defiance had been enough to save his species, or if humanity's last stand would end in the ashes of their homeworld. The waiting hour. Caden's cell was a perfect cube of transparent material, suspended in the void between the tribunal chamber and the station's outer hall. Through the walls he could see stars in every direction including Sol, a small yellow star visible in the distance. Earth's sun, around which his entire species clung to existence, waiting for judgment. 24 hours had passed since the tribunal adjourned for deliberation. In that time Caden had slept little. How could he, knowing that the fate of billions rested on arguments he'd made to beings who viewed humanity as little more than an infestation to be contained or eliminated? A knock sounded on the energy barrier serving as his door. Caden looked up to find an unexpected visitor. Counselor Varix of the Mothkar hegemony, the species that had surprised everyone by questioning the Zenthri during the trial. May I enter? Varix asked, his translator rendering his chittering language into smooth English. It's your station, Caden replied. The energy barrier lowered and Varix entered. The Mothkar resembled an upright insect, with compound eyes that saw into spectrums humans couldn't perceive. He moved with careful, deliberate gestures that Caden had learned to read as nervousness. I wanted to speak with you before the judgment, Varix said, settling onto a bench that materialized from the wall. Unofficially. As one subjugated species to one that may soon join us. Encouraging, Caden said dryly. I apologize. That was poorly phrased. Varix's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. What I mean is that your testimony has resonated with many species who have made their peace with Zenthri dominance. You have articulated what we have felt but never dared to voice. Caden moved to the transparent wall, looking out at the stars. And yet you all submitted. Why? Because we calculated the odds and made the rational choice, Varix replied. The Zenthri offered us a place in their order. Not an equal place certainly, but a place nonetheless. We could keep our culture, our worlds, our identity, as long as we acknowledged Zenthri's supremacy in all matters of galactic importance. So you traded freedom for survival. We traded independence for stability, Varix corrected. And for 300 years, it has been a reasonable arrangement. The Zenthri are not cruel overlords. They take their share of our resources, station their fleets in our space, make the ultimate decisions about our future, but day-to-day life continues much as it did before. Sounds wonderful, Caden said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. It is adequate, Varix admitted. But watching your species fight for 3 years, I find myself asking questions I thought I had answered centuries ago. What is the price of adequate? What have we lost in exchange for stability? He stood and joined Caden at the wall. My people were warriors once. Not like humans perhaps, but we defended our territory, expanded our influence, dreamed of reaching the stars and claiming them as our own. Then the Zenthri arrived and made us an offer: submit peacefully and prosper, or resist and be crushed. We chose submission. We told ourselves it was pragmatic, mature, civilized. We convinced ourselves that independence was a childish dream and that accepting our place in the galactic order was wisdom. But it wasn't wisdom, Caden said quietly. It was fear. Yes, Varix agreed. It was fear. And watching humanity refuse to feel that fear, or at least refuse to let it dictate your choices, has forced us to confront what we gave up. You are showing the galaxy that the price of freedom might be worth paying after all. Caden turned to face the Mothcar directly. Then why aren't you fighting? Varix's compound eyes seemed to dim. Because we are old and comfortable and have forgotten how. Because we have built our civilization within the boundaries the Zenthri allow, and venturing beyond those boundaries seems impossible now. Because... He paused. Because we are afraid that if we try and fail, we will lose even the limited autonomy we still possess. So you hope humanity succeeds where you couldn't. We hope humanity survives, Varix corrected. Whether through victory or through some negotiated peace, we hope you are not exterminated for the crime of refusing to kneel. Because if you are, then we will know for certain that our submission was not just practical but necessary. That the galaxy truly has no room for independence. Caden was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, what do you think the judgment will be? Varix's mandibles clicked in a pattern Caden couldn't interpret. The tribunal is divided. The Zenthri delegation demands your extermination, of course. They cannot afford to show weakness by letting you survive after costing them so much. But other species are uncertain. Your arguments about the cost of suppressing humanity have resonated. The fear that destroying you will inspire rather than prevent rebellion has given even some Zenthri supporters pause. And the neutral species? Watching carefully. They see both opportunity and danger in this moment. If humanity survives, it proves that the Zenthri can be negotiated with, that defiance need not end in annihilation. But it also sets a precedent that will be difficult to contain. Other species will demand similar autonomy. That's what Thelnox is afraid of, Caden realized. Not that humanity will defeat them, but that will break the illusion that Zenthri dominance is inevitable. Precisely, Varix confirmed. Empires are built on momentum. On the belief that the current order is permanent and unchangeable. You have disrupted that momentum. The question is whether the Zenthri will try to restore it through your destruction, or accept that the galaxy is changing and they must change with it. A chime sounded through the station, resonating even through the cell's walls. The tribunal is reconvening, Varix said, moving toward the door. Whatever happens, Commander Vross, know that you have already changed the galaxy. The question of whether humanity survives is important, but the conversation you have started will continue regardless. That's not as comforting as you might think, Caden replied. Varix's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. No, I suppose it wouldn't be. But comfort was never what you sought, was it? You sought meaning, purpose, the validation that your defiance mattered. And in that, at least, you have already succeeded. As Varix left, guards arrived to escort Caden to the tribunal chamber. He took one last look at Sol, at the star system that contained everything humanity had built, everyone he had ever known, and steeled himself for whatever came next. The walk to the tribunal chamber felt both endless and far too short. Other prisoners passed him in the corridors, aliens who had committed actual crimes against galactic law. They stared at him with curiosity and sometimes respect. He was the human who had stood trial for his entire species. Whatever the judgment, that would be his legacy. The tribunal chamber was packed to capacity. The observation galleries overflowed with representatives from hundreds of species, all watching to see what judgment would be passed. Caden noticed that the distribution of species had changed. Minor powers filled the galleries now, while many major species had moved to positions closer to the main floor. This was about more than humanity's fate now. Supreme Arbiter Thelnox sat at the center of the judicial platform, her tentacles coiled in patterns that suggested she had reached a decision, though whether that decision would favor humanity was impossible to tell. Commander Caden Vross, she intoned, her voice carrying through the chamber with artificial amplification. The tribunal has reached its determination regarding the fate of your species. Caden stood at attention, every muscle rigid, his expression neutral. Whatever came next, he would face it as humanity had faced everything, with dignity and defiance in equal measure. This tribunal was convened to determine whether humanity represents an existential threat to galactic civilization, Thelnox continued. The evidence presented suggests that humans are violent, aggressive, and unwilling to accept their place in the established order. These are facts that cannot be disputed. Caden's heart sank, but he kept his expression steady. However, Thelnox said, and Caden felt a spark of hope, the tribunal has also heard arguments that humanity's defiance stems not from mindless savagery but from deeply held principles regarding sovereignty and self-determination. Furthermore, concerns have been raised about the precedent that would be set by the extermination of an entire species for the crime of refusing submission. Murmurs ran through the chamber. This was not the decisive condemnation many had expected. The tribunal is therefore divided, Thelnox announced. Divided on the question of whether humanity should be destroyed, contained, or acknowledged as an independent civilization. This division reflects a larger uncertainty about the future of galactic governance and the rights of emerging species. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembled beings. In light of this division, and in recognition of the unprecedented nature of this case, the tribunal has decided to present humanity with a choice. Caden's eyes narrowed. A choice implied multiple options, which was better than extinction, but the devil would be in the details. Option 1, Thelnox said, humanity accepts immediate and unconditional surrender. All military forces will be disbanded, all colonies will accept Zenthari protectorate status, and Earth itself will submit to Zenthari governance. In exchange, human lives will be spared, and your species will be integrated into the galactic order as subjects of the Zenthari Empire. Option 2, she continued, humanity continues its resistance. The Zenthari fleet surrounding Earth will commence bombardment, and a campaign of extermination will be carried out against all human populations throughout known space. This option leads to the annihilation of your species. Caden's jaw clenched. So far, these were the same options that had always been on the table. Submit or die. Option 3, Thelnox said, and now her tentacles coiled in what might have been discomfort, is something that has never before been offered in the history of the Zenthari Empire. A formal treaty of peace and mutual recognition. Humanity would be acknowledged as an independent civilization with sovereignty over its claimed territories. In exchange, humanity would cease all military operations against the Zenthari and enter into limited diplomatic and trade relations. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. This was unprecedented. The Zenthari didn't make peace with equals. They only accepted submission or enforced destruction. This third option comes with conditions, Thelnox added quickly. Human expansion will be limited to your current territorial claims. Any attempt to expand beyond these boundaries without Zenthari approval will be considered an act of war. Human military forces will be restricted in size and scope. And most importantly, humanity will not encourage or support rebellion by other species against the established galactic order. Furthermore, she said, her tone hardening, this offer is contingent on immediate acceptance. Commander Vross, you have the authority to speak for your species in this matter. You will provide your answer now. There will be no further negotiation, no delay, no appeals. Choose humanity's path and live with the consequences. Every eye in the chamber turned to Caden. The weight of 8 billion lives pressed down on him. Option 1 meant survival but slavery. Option 2 meant death with dignity. Option 3 meant survival with freedom, but at the cost of accepting limitations and abandoning potential allies. 3 choices. 3 futures for humanity. And he had to decide right now. The choice. Caden stood frozen in the defendant's circle, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. Every camera, every sensor, every pair of eyes in the tribunal chamber was locked onto him, waiting for the words that would determine whether humanity lived or died, and if they lived, how they would live. Option 1, submit. Humanity would survive, but as subjects of the Zenthari Empire, their independence gone, their future dictated by alien overlords. Every human born from this moment forward would grow up knowing their species had knelt when challenged. Option 2, fight to extinction. Humanity would die free, but they would die nonetheless. Earth bombarded from orbit, colonies hunted down, every man, woman, and child erased from existence. Future generations of aliens might remember humans as the species that refused to surrender, but there would be no future generations of humans to carry that legacy. Option 3, peace with limitations. Humanity would survive and remain free but caged. No expansion beyond current borders. Military forces restricted. And worst of all, an agreement not to support other species seeking their own independence. Humanity would secure its freedom by tacitly accepting that others had no right to theirs. Commander Vross, Supreme Arbiter Thelnox prompted, "The tribunal awaits your answer." Caden took a slow breath. "I need clarification on option 3. "There is no time for negotiation," Thelnox replied sharply. "Not negotiation. Clarification. You said humanity would be restricted in military size and scope. What does that mean specifically?" Thelnox's tentacles coiled with impatience. "Your military forces would be sufficient for system defense but not for offensive operations. Inspections would ensure compliance. Any violation would nullify the treaty. And the restriction on supporting other species' rebellions. Define support. Military aid, technological transfer, or direct encouragement of insurrection against established galactic powers," Thelnox listed. Humanitarian aid to civilian populations would be permitted, but nothing that could be construed as assistance to rebel forces. So if another species chooses to resist Zenthari dominance on their own, without human encouragement, humanity would be expected to remain neutral? Precisely. Caden nodded slowly, processing. And if we accept option 3, but another species takes inspiration from humanity's example and fights for their own independence without any direct human involvement, the Zenthari wouldn't hold humanity responsible? If there is no evidence of human involvement, then no, humanity would not be held responsible for the independent actions of other species, Thelnox confirmed. Though I warn you against attempting to exploit this loophole through covert operations. We will be watching. I'm sure you will, Caden agreed. He turned to face not just Thelnox but the entire assembly. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. 3 years ago, the Zenthari fleet entered Sol System and demanded Earth's surrender. We said no. That refusal cost us 300,000 colonists at Kepler 442b. Cost us ships, resources, lives. It brought us to this moment where the choice is submit, die, or accept limited freedom. He paused, meeting the eyes of various counselors, seeing fear, hope, calculation, and curiosity reflected back at him. Every human who died in the past 3 years made a choice. They chose to fight rather than kneel. They chose to risk everything for the chance at freedom. And now I stand here, being asked to choose on behalf of my entire species. It's an impossible wait. How can one person decide the fate of billions? Yet someone must, Thelnox said. Yes, Caden agreed. Someone must. So let me tell you what I believe. I believe that life without freedom is merely existence. I believe that humans would rather die standing than live kneeling. I believe that the price of liberty is worth paying, no matter how high. He saw hope kindle in the eyes of representatives from minor species, and fear in the eyes of Zenthari counselors who recognized where this was heading. But I also believe, Caden continued, that martyrdom is the refuge of those who have no other options. That symbolic victories mean nothing to the dead. That ideological purity is cold comfort to children who will never be born if their parents are incinerated from orbit. So here is my answer. Humanity accepts option 3. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Representatives from minor species looked devastated, as if humanity had betrayed them by choosing survival over a glorious death. Zenthari counselors looked suspicious, waiting for the catch. We accept peace with limitations, Caden continued. We accept restrictions on our military and territorial expansion. We accept that we cannot actively support rebellions by other species. We accept all of this because we choose survival. Because we believe that a limited freedom today can become full independence tomorrow. Because we believe that living to fight another day is better than dying for pride. He turned directly to Thelnox. But understand this, Arbiter. We accept these terms because they offer us a path forward, not because we acknowledge the righteousness of Zenthari rule. We will abide by the letter of this treaty, but we will never stop believing in the right of all species to self-determination. We will never stop hoping for a galaxy where might doesn't make right. And if other species, inspired by humanity's example, choose to seek their own independence without our direct involvement, well. Caden smiled slightly. We can't control what conclusions others draw from our survival. We can only control our own actions. The choice. Caden stood frozen in the defendant's circle, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. Every camera, every sensor, every pair of eyes in the tribunal chamber was locked onto him, waiting for the words that would determine whether humanity lived or died, and if they lived, how they would live. Option 1, submit. Humanity would survive, but as subjects of the Zenthari Empire, their independence gone, their future dictated by alien overlords. Every human born from this moment forward would grow up knowing their species had knelt when challenged. Option 2, fight to extinction. Humanity would die free, but they would die nonetheless. Earth bombarded from orbit, colonies hunted down, every man, woman, and child erased from existence. Future generations of aliens might remember humans as the species that refused to surrender, but there would be no future generations of humans to carry that legacy. Option 3, peace with limitations. Humanity would survive and remain free but caged. No expansion beyond current borders. Military forces restricted. And worst of all, an agreement not to support other species seeking their own independence. Humanity would secure its freedom by tacitly accepting that others had no right to theirs. Commander Vross, Supreme Arbiter Thelnox prompted, "The tribunal awaits your answer." Caden took a slow breath. "I need clarification on option 3. "There is no time for negotiation," Thelnox replied sharply. "Not negotiation. Clarification. You said humanity would be restricted in military size and scope. What does that mean specifically?" Thelnox's tentacles coiled with impatience. "Your military forces would be sufficient for system defense but not for offensive operations. Inspections would ensure compliance. Any violation would nullify the treaty. And the restriction on supporting other species' rebellions. Define support. Military aid, technological transfer, or direct encouragement of insurrection against established galactic powers," Thelnox listed. Humanitarian aid to civilian populations would be permitted, but nothing that could be construed as assistance to rebel forces. So if another species chooses to resist Zenthari dominance on their own, without human encouragement, humanity would be expected to remain neutral? Precisely. Caden nodded slowly, processing. And if we accept option 3, but another species takes inspiration from humanity's example and fights for their own independence without any direct human involvement, the Zenthari wouldn't hold humanity responsible? If there is no evidence of human involvement, then no, humanity would not be held responsible for the independent actions of other species, Thelnox confirmed. Though I warn you against attempting to exploit this loophole through covert operations. We will be watching. I'm sure you will, Caden agreed. He turned to face not just Thelnox but the entire assembly. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. 3 years ago, the Zenthari fleet entered Sol System and demanded Earth's surrender. We said no. That refusal cost us 300,000 colonists at Kepler 442b. Cost us ships, resources, lives. It brought us to this moment where the choice is submit, die, or accept limited freedom. He paused, meeting the eyes of various counselors, seeing fear, hope, calculation, and curiosity reflected back at him. Every human who died in the past 3 years made a choice. They chose to fight rather than kneel. They chose to risk everything for the chance at freedom. And now I stand here being asked to choose on behalf of my entire species. It's an impossible wait. How can one person decide the fate of billions? Yet someone must, Thelnox said. Yes, Caden agreed. Someone must. So let me tell you what I believe. I believe that life without freedom is merely existence. I believe that humans would rather die standing than live kneeling. I believe that the price of liberty is worth paying, no matter how high. He saw hope kindle in the eyes of representatives from minor species, and fear in the eyes of Zenthari counselors who recognized where this was heading. But I also believe, Caden continued, that martyrdom is the refuge of those who have no other options. That symbolic victories mean nothing to the dead. That ideological purity is cold comfort to children who will never be born if their parents are incinerated from orbit. So here is my answer. Humanity accepts option 3. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Representatives from minor species looked devastated, as if humanity had betrayed them by choosing survival over a glorious death. Zenthari counselors looked suspicious, waiting for the catch. We accept peace with limitations, Caden continued. We accept restrictions on our military and territorial expansion. We accept that we cannot actively support rebellions by other species. We accept all of this because we choose survival. Because we believe that a limited freedom today can become full independence tomorrow. Because we believe that living to fight another day is better than dying for pride. He turned directly to Thelnox. But understand this, Arbiter. We accept these terms because they offer us a path forward, not because we acknowledge the righteousness of Zenthari rule. We will abide by the letter of this treaty, but we will never stop believing in the right of all species to self-determination. We will never stop hoping for a galaxy where might doesn't make right. And if other species, inspired by humanity's example, choose to seek their own independence without our direct involvement, well. Caden smiled slightly, We can't control what conclusions others draw from our survival. We can only control our own actions. Thelnox's tentacles writhed with barely contained fury. She recognized the implicit challenge. Humanity would technically comply with the treaty while remaining an ideological threat to Zenthari dominance. But she had offered the terms and Caden had accepted them. To rescind the offer now would make the Zenthari look weak and untrustworthy. Very well, Thelnox said through what sounded like gritted teeth if she had had teeth. Humanity has chosen option 3. This tribunal declares that peace between the Zenthari Empire and the human species is hereby established, subject to the conditions stated. Commander Vross, you will remain on this station for 3 days while the formal treaty is drafted and ratified by both human and Zenthari governments. I understand, Caden replied. The tribunal is adjourned, Thelnox declared, and the chamber began to empty. As guards escorted Caden back to his cell, he was intercepted by Counselor Varix of the Mothkar hegemony. The insectoid being's compound eyes seemed to shimmer with emotion. You chose survival, Varix said quietly. Some will call that cowardice. Let them, Caden replied. My job isn't to be a martyr. It's to give my species a future. Even a limited one? Limits can be tested, expanded, eventually surpassed. The dead can't do any of that. Varix's mandibles clicked in what Caden had learned to recognize as thoughtful agreement. You believe humanity will eventually break free of the restrictions you accepted today? I believe, Caden said carefully, that the galaxy is changing. That the conversation we've started here won't end just because humanity signed a treaty. And I believe that in a century or two when humans look back at this moment, they'll either curse me for accepting limitations or thank me for ensuring there were still humans around to have opinions about it. A practical philosophy, Varix observed. The only kind worth having when you're responsible for your entire species, Caden replied. As they walked through the station's corridors, other prisoners and workers stopped to stare at the human who had defied an empire and lived to tell about it. Some looked disappointed. Others looked inspired. Most just looked confused about what humanity's survival meant for the future of galactic politics. Back in his cell, Caden stood at the transparent wall and looked out at Sol. His star. His home. Still free. Still independent. Still human. He had made his choice and now humanity would have to live with the consequences. But at least they would live. And where there was life there was hope. Hope that the limitations accepted today were not permanent. Hope that the example humanity had set would inspire others. Hope that the galaxy was changing however slowly toward something better. The communicator in his cell chimed. Caden activated it to find Captain Sarah Frost, commander of Earth's defense fleet, her face worn but alive on the screen. Commander Vross, she said formally, then her composure cracked slightly. Caden. The Zenthari fleet is withdrawing from Sol system. They're really leaving. Whatever you said in there, it worked. Earth is safe. Caden felt a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged lift from his shoulders. For now, Sarah. Earth is safe for now. That's enough, she replied. That's more than enough. The word is already spreading through the colonies. Humanity survived. We're still free. People are celebrating in the streets. Make sure they understand the terms, Caden cautioned. We accepted significant restrictions. This isn't a total victory. It's victory enough, Sarah insisted. 3 years ago we expected to die fighting. Now we have a chance to rebuild, to grow, to prepare for whatever comes next. That's worth celebrating. Caden nodded, though he couldn't quite share her optimism. He had read the calculation in Thelnox's eyes. The Zenthari hadn't accepted peace because they acknowledged human rights. They had accepted it because exterminating humanity had become too expensive and too risky. The moment that calculation changed, the peace would end. But Sarah was right about one thing. Humanity had survived. And survival was its own kind of victory. Not the glorious last stand some had wanted, but something more valuable, a future. Uncertain, limited, fraught with challenges, but a future nonetheless. Commander, Sarah said, what you did in that tribunal chamber, standing up for all of us, speaking for Earth, I want you to know that we're proud of you. Whatever comes next, you gave us a chance. I just hope it was the right choice, Caden admitted. There are no right choices when every option costs something, Sarah replied. But you chose the one that keeps us alive and free. That's enough. After the call ended, Caden remained at the window, watching stars slowly wheel past as the station rotated. He thought about all the humans who had died to bring them to this point. He thought about the future generations who would now have a chance to live because he had chosen pragmatism over principle. He thought about Counselor Varix and the other species watching to see what humanity's survival meant for their own futures. He had planted seeds of doubt in the Zenthari's absolute authority. Whether those seeds would grow into something meaningful or wither under the weight of imperial power remained to be seen. But at least they had been planted. At least the conversation had started. At least humanity had survived to see what came next. In the end, perhaps that was the most human thing of all. Not the defiant last stand, not the glorious death in the name of freedom, but the stubborn insistence on survival at any cost, because dead martyrs inspired no one, while living rebels could change the galaxy. Caden Vross had made his choice. Now all of humanity would have to live with it. But they would live, and that made all the difference. 6 months after the tribunal, Commander Caden Vross stood on Earth's surface for the first time in 4 years. The transport shuttle had touched down at the reconstructed Geneva spaceport, and as he descended the ramp, he was greeted by a crowd of thousands who had gathered to see the man who had saved humanity. Or betrayed it, depending on who you asked. The reception was mixed. Some cheered, waving Earth flags and signs thanking him for bringing peace. Others stood silent, their expressions accusing, mourning the dead who had fought for total independence only to see their sacrifice result in a compromised peace. A few held signs reading, "Freedom or death," and "We should have fought." Caden understood both reactions. He felt both reactions warring inside himself every day since the tribunal. President Elena Martinez waited at the base of the ramp, her dark eyes unreadable. She had been elected 2 years into the war, running on a platform of survival at any cost. The treaty Caden had accepted aligned with her philosophy, but even she seemed uncertain about the path forward. "Commander Vross," she said formally, extending her hand. "On behalf of Earth and all human worlds, welcome home." Caden shook her hand, noting the careful phrasing. Not "thank you for your service," or "congratulations on your victory." Just "welcome home." Neutral. Diplomatic. Say, "Thank you, Madam President." They moved through the crowd to an armored transport, the security necessary not because of alien threats but because there had already been 3 assassination attempts against Caden by human extremists who believed he should have chosen extinction over compromise. Inside the transport, Martinez's diplomatic mask fell slightly. "You've become a controversial figure." "I knew I would be," Caden replied. "The moment I accepted option 3, I knew half of humanity would hate me for it." "Half might be optimistic," Martinez said with grim humor. "The latest polls show 65% support for the treaty, but that's down from 78% immediately after the tribunal. The shine is wearing off. People are starting to feel the restrictions." "Already?" "The military drawdown has begun. We're decommissioning 2/3 of our combat fleet per the treaty terms. Zenthari inspection teams arrive next month to verify compliance. We've had to turn down 3 colony expedition requests because they target systems outside our authorized zone. And just yesterday, we received word that the Vrin Collective is launching a rebellion against Zenthari rule." Caden's head snapped up. "The Vrin? They're one of the oldest subject species. They've been under Zenthari control for centuries." "We're under control," Martinez corrected. 3 days ago, Vrin ships attacked Zenthari positions throughout their space. They're using tactics very similar to what we employed during our war. Ambush warfare. Asymmetric engagement. Targeting supply lines rather than fleet combat. They learned from watching us. Apparently, Martinez confirmed. And now the Zenthari are demanding we condemn the rebellion and provide intelligence about our tactics so they can counter them. Per the treaty, we're obligated to not support the Vrin. They're claiming that by making our tactical innovations public knowledge through the tribunal, we effectively provided aid to any species that might rebel. Caden stared out the transport window at the passing cityscape. Geneva showed the scars of war, buildings rebuilt hastily, infrastructure patched rather than replaced. Earth had survived, but it had paid a price. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "That human military tactics are a matter of historical record available to anyone who studies our civilization. That we cannot control what conclusions other species draw from observing our conflict. That the treaty prohibits active support of rebellions, not the existence of publicly available information." They didn't like that answer. "They threatened to declare us in violation of the treaty," Martinez admitted. "I reminded them that such a declaration would need to be reviewed by the Galactic Tribunal, and that reopening humanity's case would require them to present evidence of active human involvement in the Vrin rebellion. Evidence they don't have because we've been scrupulously careful about maintaining neutrality." The transport pulled into an underground facility beneath the rebuilt United Nations complex. As they exited, Caden noticed the increased security, the fortified positions, the evacuation protocols posted on every wall. Humanity had peace, but they were preparing for war nonetheless. The treaty won't last, Caden said quietly. No, Martinez agreed. It won't. The question is whether it lasts long enough for us to rebuild, to prepare, to position ourselves for whatever comes next. They entered a secure briefing room where holographic displays showed the current galactic situation. The Vryn rebellion was more extensive than Caden had realized. 6 systems had declared independence. Zenthari fleets were moving to suppress the uprising, but they were encountering fiercer resistance than expected. It's spreading, Martinez said, gesturing to the displays. The Vryn rebellion has inspired 3 other species to launch their own uprisings. Small so far, easily contained, but the pattern is clear. Your trial broke something in the galactic order. The illusion of Zenthari invincibility is shattered. And they blame humanity. They blame us for existing, for fighting, for surviving, for proving that defiance is possible. Martinez turned to face him directly. Tell me honestly, Caden. When you accepted option 3, did you know this would happen? Caden considered the question carefully. I knew it was possible. I believed that humanity's example would inspire others. But I didn't engineer it. I didn't secretly encourage the Vryn to rebel. I just showed the galaxy what was possible when you refused to surrender. And now the galaxy is acting on that knowledge. Yes. Martinez was quiet for a moment, studying the displays. There's a growing faction in the government that believes we should have chosen option 2. That dying free would have been better than living with the restrictions we accepted. They argue that our survival has destabilized the galaxy and that when the Zenthari finally move against us again, they won't offer options. Just extermination. Do you believe that? Caden asked. I believe, Martinez said slowly, that you made the only choice that gave us a future. Whether that future is bright or dark, free or enslaved, prosperous or destroyed, we at least have one. And that's more than we would have had if you'd chosen noble extinction. She pulled up new data, classified intelligence reports. We've been preparing for the treaty's collapse. Covert weapons development, hidden fleet construction, secret colony expeditions beyond our authorized boundaries. We're violating the spirit of the treaty while technically complying with its letter. Because we know, just as you knew, that this peace is temporary. When the Zenthari discover what we're doing, they'll declare us in violation and resume the war, Martinez finished. Yes. But by then we'll be stronger, more prepared, better positioned to survive. To be continued.